There is a document that was never supposed to become public. It was produced this week by the Joint Staff's Intelligence Directorate, classified, delivered directly to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, and meant to stay inside the walls of the Pentagon. Instead, it landed in the Washington Post on the same morning that Donald Trump was shaking hands with Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. And what it says about China's position in this war is one of the most alarming assessments any branch of the American intelligence community has produced since February 28th. The report is real. The Washington Post confirmed it with 2 U.S. officials who have read it, and what it concludes is not ambiguous. China is exploiting the Iran war to maximize its strategic advantage over the United States across every major dimension of national power simultaneously, without deploying a single soldier, without firing a single weapon, and without publicly taking a side in the conflict at all. That is the story. Not what China is saying, not what Beijing is denying, but what America's own classified intelligence apparatus is telling the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on paper. This week, as the President of the United States flies to Beijing to ask the man whose country authored this playbook to help him out of the hole it helped create. Welcome to Dr-NoraLen. Today is May 14th, 2026. Subscribe right now and hit notifications because this story has 4 parts and each one cuts deeper than the last. Part 2 breaks down exactly what China has done across each dimension the report identifies. Part 3 covers what the Pentagon is now alarmed about regarding Taiwan. And Part 4 takes you inside the Beijing summit itself, and why the timing of this leak, on the same day Trump landed in China, is not a coincidence. You need all 4 parts because the full picture of what is happening here has not been told anywhere in one place with the depth it deserves. The report uses what the Pentagon calls the DIME framework. That stands for diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. It is the standard analytical lens the U.S. military uses to assess how any nation is applying its instruments of national power. And what the Joint Staff's Intelligence Directorate found is that across all 4 of those dimensions, China has not been sitting on the sidelines of this war. It has been playing it systematically, carefully, and with a precision that has raised alarm bells across the entire senior leadership of the American military. The report was produced for General Kane specifically because the Pentagon needed a comprehensive picture of Beijing's activity before Trump walked into the summit. It was meant to inform the American negotiating posture. Instead, because it was leaked to the Washington Post and published on May 14th, it has now also informed every government in the world watching this summit about what America's own intelligence community thinks China has been doing while Trump's press team was calling it a diplomatic partner. The White House responded. Spokeswoman Olivia Wales said the U.S. had, quote, decimated the Iranian regime's military capabilities in 38 short days and is now strangling what's left of their economy with one of the most successful naval blockades in history. That is the official line. And then there is the classified line, produced by the Joint Chiefs' own Intelligence Directorate, that describes a country being systematically outmaneuvered across 4 domains simultaneously by a rival that did not fire a single shot to do it. Both of those things are simultaneously true. The United States has enormous military power and has applied it with devastating effect against Iranian military infrastructure. And China has used the 76 days since February 28th to reposition itself geopolitically in ways that the American military's own analysts now consider a major strategic gain for Beijing. That is the reality that awaited Trump in Beijing this morning. And it is the reality that every government watching this summit needs to understand. Let's go through what China actually did, because the DIME framework the report uses gives us the clearest possible structure for understanding how Beijing played this war, and each dimension reveals a different layer of a strategy that was never announced, never acknowledged, and in several cases actively denied by Chinese officials even as it was being executed. Start with the diplomatic dimension. According to the classified assessment and confirmed through public reporting, China used the war to systematically portray the United States as a dangerous and reckless actor rather than a responsible global leader. In every international forum, in every bilateral conversation with countries watching the conflict unfold, Beijing's message was consistent. America started a war. America closed a waterway. America is the source of global instability. And China is the responsible power calling for a ceasefire, offering mediation, and presenting itself as the solution provider the world needs. Iran's foreign minister visited Beijing just days before Trump arrived for his summit. China hosted that meeting, issued calls for a complete cessation of hostilities, and positioned itself as the only major power with genuine access to both sides. And then, immediately after that visit, Putin is scheduled to arrive in Beijing the moment Trump leaves. Beijing is sequencing these meetings deliberately, making itself the hub through which every major power in this conflict must pass. Now the informational dimension, and this is where the story becomes genuinely alarming. Private Chinese technology companies, some with direct ties to the People's Liberation Army, began marketing detailed intelligence on movements of U.S. forces inside Iran almost from the opening days of the conflict. The Washington Post reported on April 4th that these firms were offering satellite imagery, tracking data, and positional intelligence on American military assets through commercial channels. The U.S. subsequently sanctioned 3 Chinese companies, Mientropy Technology, the Earth Eye, and Changguang Satellite Technology, specifically for providing geospatial intelligence to Iran that enabled Iranian forces to target American and Allied positions. Read that slowly. Chinese companies were selling targeting data, not to the United States, to Iran, while Iranian forces were using that data to direct strikes against American military bases in the Gulf. And those companies operated, at least initially, through commercial channels, maintaining Beijing's deniability even as their satellites tracked U.S. destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz. Now the military dimension. Since the war started, China sold weapons to Persian Gulf allies of the United States as those allies struggled to defend their military bases and oil infrastructure from Iranian missile and drone attacks. The report states this directly. China sold weapons to the Gulf states being attacked by Iran. At the same time, U.S. intelligence found that China was preparing to ship man-portable air defense systems to Iran through third countries. CNN confirmed this in April. The Defense Intelligence Agency separately reported that China was considering supplying Iran with X-band radar systems. Let that picture sit for a moment. China was simultaneously arming America's Gulf allies and preparing to arm Iran, selling defense systems to the countries being hit by missiles, while preparing to ship the weapons technology that helps the country firing those missiles survive. That is not neutrality. That is a strategy of sustaining both sides of a conflict from which Beijing profits regardless of the outcome. And the economic dimension, which is the dimension most visible to the outside world but whose full scope has still not been grasped. China became what one analyst described to reporters as a solutions provider, offering access to jet fuel and other products that were in short supply as a bridge for the short term, and offering Chinese-produced green energy technology as a longer-term alternative to the countries, including Thailand, Australia, the Philippines, and others, that Beijing reached out to help manage their energy needs since the war started. China absorbed more than 80% of Iran's shipped oil in 2025. It continued buying Iranian crude in defiance of U.S. sanctions throughout the conflict. And on May 2nd, China's Ministry of Commerce ordered companies and banks to defy U.S. sanctions on Chinese refineries, invoking for the first time a law that allows Beijing to retaliate against what it considers unlawful foreign restrictions. China ordered its own financial system to ignore American law, publicly, on the record, during a war in which it is claiming neutrality. Now we come to the dimension of this intelligence report that has the Pentagon most alarmed, and that is not about the Middle East at all. It is about Taiwan. And what the classified assessment reportedly identifies is that China has been using the Iran war as a live classroom, absorbing lessons from American operations that it intends to apply in a completely different theater. John Culver, who served as National Intelligence Officer for East Asia at the CIA from 2015 to 2018 and is now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, spoke publicly to the Washington Post ahead of the summit about precisely this point. What the People's Liberation Army has been doing since February 28, he said, is watching, not the war in the abstract, but the specific operational details. The sequencing of strikes, the vulnerability of air defense systems to combined missile and drone saturation attacks, the rate at which the United States depleted critical ammunition stockpiles, and the specific choke points in American logistics that the campaign against Iran exposed. That last point is the one that has generated the most internal alarm. The U.S. military used large quantities of critical ammunition in the Iran war: cruise missiles, interceptor missiles, precision-guided munitions. The stockpiles for those weapons systems are now significantly lower than they were on February 27th. And according to the classified assessment's military dimension, Beijing noticed. China's military planners noted that it will take a long time for the U.S. to replenish the shortfall now being felt across stockpiles in Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. China went to school on what America shoots and how fast it shoots it, and it is now calibrating its own planning around the gaps those expenditures created. The US also sanctioned 3 Chinese companies specifically for providing satellite data to Iran for targeting purposes. But what those companies simultaneously generated for the Chinese military was an operational intelligence picture of how the US projects power in a contested theater, where the carrier groups position, how the destroyer escorts deploy, what the timing patterns of strike packages look like from orbit. Every piece of data those Chinese satellites collected while tracking American forces in the Strait of Hormuz was not just sold to Iran. It was archived. It was analyzed. It was fed into PLA planning systems that model exactly the kind of operations China would need to conduct or survive in a Taiwan scenario. Today at the Beijing summit, Xi warned Trump directly that Taiwan is the most important issue in the US-China relationship, and that if handled poorly it would push both countries toward confrontation or even conflict. That is not diplomatic boilerplate. That is a leader who knows precisely what his military has learned from 7 to 6 days of watching America fight, and who is communicating, in the clearest possible terms, that Beijing's confidence in its own position has grown during the period of the Iran war, not shrunk. The Thucydides trap that she invoked to Trump's face is the theory that a rising power and a ruling power tend historically toward war. She was not simply asking a rhetorical question. He was signaling that China does not intend to back down from its core interests, and that the military lessons it has absorbed from the Iran conflict have not made it more cautious. They have made it more precise. Trump and Xi did agree on one significant point. Both sides stated after the first round of meetings that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy, and that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Both leaders aligned publicly on those 2 statements. But the classified report released on the same morning tells a different story about what has been happening below the level of public statements. And the gap between what China says and what America's own intelligence says China does is the most important strategic fact of this entire summit. Here is the deepest layer of this story, and the one that mainstream coverage is missing entirely. The leak of this classified intelligence assessment on the same day Trump landed in Beijing was not random. Classified documents produced for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs do not find their way to the Washington Post by accident. Someone with access to this report, someone inside the U.S. national security apparatus, decided that the American president needed to walk into this summit with this information on the front page of the world's most read newspaper. That decision tells you something important about where the internal debate inside the U.S. government currently stands. There are people inside the Pentagon and the intelligence community who believe Trump is walking into this summit without adequately understanding how thoroughly China has exploited the last 7 to 6 days. And leaking a classified report to the Washington Post on the morning of the summit is the most visible possible way of making that concern impossible for the White House to ignore. The White House's official response was to dismiss the report's implications. Spokeswoman Olivia Wales emphasized the military's battlefield achievements and the effectiveness of the naval blockade. But the report is not about battlefield achievements. It is about strategic positioning. And strategic positioning is exactly where, according to America's own Joint Staff Intelligence Directorate, China has made its most significant gains. Consider the full picture of what she brought to this meeting. He hosted Iran's foreign minister days before Trump arrived, establishing Beijing as the channel through which any diplomatic resolution must flow. He is hosting Putin immediately after Trump leaves, signaling that Russia's relationship with China is not contingent on American goodwill. He oversaw a period in which Chinese companies sold weapons to Gulf states, prepared shipments to Iran, provided satellite targeting data that was used against American forces, and ordered China's financial system to defy U.S. sanctions. And he walked into the Great Hall of the People today to meet a U.S. president whose approval ratings are at record lows, whose strategic petroleum reserve is draining at the fastest pace in recorded history at 8.6 million barrels per week, whose Senate just voted 50-49 on a war powers challenge with 3 Republicans breaking ranks, and whose own intelligence community published, on this exact morning, a classified finding that China is winning the strategic competition created by this war without firing a single shot. Scott Kennedy, senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said it clearly. China comes into this meeting far more confident than in 2017, when it feared even a small rise in U.S. tariffs. In the last year, she has been able to push back and neutralize much of Trump's actions. And yet the two leaders emerged from their first round of talks describing the meeting as good. Trump called Xi a great leader to his face. Both agreed Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Xi invited to a White House visit in September. The optics were warm. The choreography was careful, and running underneath all of it, visible only if you read the classified report that someone decided the world needed to see today, was the full weight of what China has built during the 7 to 6 days that America has been consumed by the Iran war. The DIME framework the Joint Staff used is a military planning tool. It is designed to assess comprehensive national power across all 4 domains simultaneously. And what it found, in a document produced for the most senior military officer in the United States, is that China scored gains in all 4. Diplomatically by positioning itself as the responsible global power. Informationally by selling targeting intelligence while claiming neutrality. Militarily by arming both sides and studying American vulnerabilities. Economically by offering itself as the energy and technology alternative to a world scrambling for options. That is not winning a battle. That is winning the conditions for the next one. Subscribe to Dr-NoraLen right now and hit that notification bell. We will cover every development from the Beijing summit as it comes out, what Day 2 of the Trump 11 talks produces, whether China commits to any real pressure on Iran, and what this classified report means for the next phase of the conflict. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the question that matters most today is this. If America's own Joint Chiefs Intelligence Directorate says China is winning this war without firing a shot, what does Washington do next? And does Trump even believe it?